Dan ga ik op zo'n naar binnen. Pemkes kak. Gede lagalet gegeven. Gede een beetje wat ook hem van de misven, wat je kisi gekim soltiak eliak lagalet. Miri daar ook en ook. Ik pemkes kak de stomon en lapquest tigenik. Welcome everybody to today's session. Today we're going to make lagalet. Lagalet is our traditional fry bread. The word actually comes from a French word which means le gâteau or les gâteaux, which is the little cakes. And because of the shape of the little cake, sometimes people will make, once they make the dough, they'll make it into little individual parts. Today we're going to make it as a whole in the frying pan. That's why it's called lapsquat digne, meaning it's in a frying pan style. There's other variations where you just make the dough and you put it into the oven. But today we have our nadakwatit, the two cooks here. Cecilia?
Miltaleva Cecilia. Wake Village, Kingsclere.
Very good, yeah.
Miltaleva Ramona, Wake Village.
Is that Dolan? So the first thing we're going to do is name the ingredients that we're using. Louis does with Auskudgehigan.
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 Gahigan.
Very good. Kjiemkwan.
Gijemkwan.
Sibelupsquat Degan, the frying pan. Sibelupsquat Degan. Sibelupsquat Degan.
Zibelupsquagigan.
Very good. Click is that? Yeah. Mime, which is the grease. Nukhaman. Okay. Zalawe. Zamagwan, which is the water. It is over there somewhere. And then Budawat Degan. It's actually, Buddha means the blowing up of, and that's what the baking powder does. Be very careful. Sometimes people will think it's baking soda, but it's not. It's baking powder, and that's what that is, and that's what makes the bread. So depending on how thick you want it or how thin you want it is how much you'll add to it. Kpaskudun nohuwa kapsizak. Kpaskudun nohuwa. Yeah, nohuwa. Kapsizak. Nukhaman. Okay, so a couple cups of flour. And nahuag is 3. And those, go ahead and put it in. Yeah. Nahuag 3. Upcha.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's good. Liwan. And usually the secret is how many cups of flour you put in or how many spoons, teaspoons or tablespoons you put in to it. So if it's 3 cups, then you do 3. So this is a big GM, so you could just maybe get that there. So that would equivalent 3 teaspoons. Okay. Geges salawe. Say it.
Solaway.
Yeah.
Solaway.
Okay. Yeah. A bit over there. Yeah, that's good. Then it's really important to mix it up because it's the baking powder and the salt that work together to make it as fluffy as possible. Okay. And bizizogaton. 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 Zamagwan. Auskitchgehik. Yeah. Agwamk niduin, more if you need it. Agwamk niduin. And say it please. Agwamk
One.
niduin.
Nidoian.
More if you need it, because you don't want it too watery. You want it to be just the right consistency, and we'll show you when it's done. Try to get all of it from there on the bowl. Yeah, there you go. Up, John. There.
So it's like
Almost. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like. She was just saying it looks like dough, but that's what it is. It's bread dough. But you try to get all that dry part out. Okay, yeah, try to mix it really good so that there's nothing on the side of the bowls. See, there's dry part there. Pick that up. Yeah. Okay. Get there. See? When you get that dry part out, see, so you just use the wet part. The dry part like that. Weniyud Olokian.
When you alukian,
Kazipasman.
gazipasman,
Yeah. Kazipasman.
Kazibazin.
Mime.
Mime.
mime,
So while you're doing this, you're heating your oil, and the oil behind us is actually heating up. So that way it'll be ready when we're all done. Debi bedek.
debi, bedek,
When it's hot enough. Ktepjakan.
depchakan,
Ktepjakan. Zibelup squat diganak. Zibelup squat diganak.
Zabalup.
Lup squat diganak.
Quack.
Diganak.
Digging.
Zibelups.
zibelups,
Square,
glass,
diganuk.
diganuk.
That means once it's made into a dough, like see that nice little dough, that there's nothing dry on the sides, then we're going to put it in the frying pan like this, okay? And it just says, put it right in like this. You just put it, I've also put it in the center of your pan. And then what you do is you just spread it out from the center. Sometimes people want it really thick, sometimes people want it thin. So this is when you decide how big you want your lagolet. And if a bigger frying pan is needed, then you get a bigger frying pan, because there's times to do it, but it's harder to handle when it's bigger, because we always use cast iron before. So we put the mime on top. Once we put it in, we put the mime on top. That way, when you flip it over, it'll already have the grease that it needs to be able to not stick to the pan. And so what we do is, it's on medium. It's best to not, sometimes people will put it on high, and what will happen is it makes a crust, and then it's not done in the middle. So what you need to do is put it on low, and then just let it cook really slow, so that way it cooks slowly through. And then you'll know, we'll check back on it after a while, when it makes a nice crust on the bottom, what we'll do is we'll flip it over and stuff. And a long time ago they used cast iron, and I still prefer using cast iron skillets. And that's the best ones, it has the best flavor and stuff. So what we do then is Kamanaga Dagozan. Go ahead, those come back. Kamanaga Dagozan.
Kamana,
Kamana.
Gadagozan.
dagozan,
Okay.
Dagazan.
Dikgil.
Diggil.
dikgil,
Gizagozid.
gizaguzit,
Gizagaz.
Zit. Okay. Wulizagalagoch.
wulizagala, uch,
Okay. Kulipin.
gulipin,
What it's saying is, when it's hot enough, pour in your dough, cook slowly until it's cooked, and when it's crispy on the bottom, and then you'll know when it's safe to flip it over, and then you let that cook slow, and then the way that we test it is just like we test bread out of the oven. You'll take your finger and you'll go to the top like this, and if it doesn't sink in, then you know it's done in the middle. And then take it out and we enjoy it, and we'll have a taste of it after a while as soon as it's done. So let's just review. Auskadjigihigan.
Auskadjigihigan.
Okay. Gjiemkwan.
Gjiemkwan.
Mime.
Mime.
Zalawe.
Zalawe.
Budawatigan.
Budawatigan.
Zamagwan.
Zamargwan.
Nukhaman.
Nukkuman.
Nitapsil. Yeah. Okay.
Neptosil.
Nitapsil. Yeah. These are the ingredients. The Gajingadiskuidman bies coming up. I'm going to talk about another traditional dish that we make. It's traditional corn soup. Traditionally, we would have made it out of the little things, corn, little bits of corn, that little kernels of corn. It was actually called cow corn. But my ancestors knew how to hull them, which means make them fluffier. Today we kind of do it the easy way. We buy cans that process is already done. But I do know of, actually I did it myself, where we actually did the traditional way. And what you would do is you would have to clean them, and that's the tedious, very tedious to do that, because you have to take one little kernel at a time, make sure that it's not all black. So it really took a long time. And then what we would do then is boil them, because they're very dirty, and cow corn, and then very dirty. And then what we would do is rinse it, but we'd put ash from our wood stove, and hardwood ash, and the hardwood ash would be what kind of cleans it. And so they would put hardwood ash in cheesecloth, put it in the bag while you're boiling the water, and then you would go through 3 boils, and then rinses. And then you add yellow white beans. People do have preferences of others, but the traditional way is yellow white beans. And you soak those yellow white beans, we call them muscozidal, the beans, and you soak them overnight. And then you cook the beans and the bieskam, and all the corn together. Salt pork is the flavor. And this is how some people will do it. They'll take a 1/4 pound of salt pork, and what they'll do is they'll either leave it whole. Some people will cut it up into little bits so you'll hardly see it. I like to put it in whole. That way, when it's done, I take the whole piece out, and that way nobody has to. Sometimes people don't like the flavor of salt pork, but that's the big flavor. Then what you do is you boil that together for hours, real slow, and then salt and pepper. Another thing to do is, in lieu of bigsay, which is salt pork, or bigsay just means anything pork, you could also take like a ham bone and use that, or a soup bone and use that. Or sometimes people will take little bits of fresh bacon and then take them out when it's done. So that's just to flavor it. And then your salt and pepper, and every special occasion we have that corn soup. Christmas Eve, after midnight mass, we used to go door to door and taste people's variations of hull corn soup. Very popular, and we still use it today. Not too many can make it the traditional way because we have a hard time finding the corn to hull, but we did save the process. So that's one of our traditional meals that goes really well with the lagalet we're making. The other one that's very traditional to us is our pot pie. And pot pie is, we used to use moose meat and beef. And today, most people will use beef, and you get a good steak, a round steak works, but it's best to get a really good steak, and pork steak as well. and you mix them up, and you cut them into, you dice them, I guess, little pieces. So you mix the pork and the same size. When you're cutting your steak, you'll start chopping it and then doing this way. You do the same thing with your pork steak. And then what you do is you put that to the side. You do your potatoes, about 6-8 potatoes, depending on the size you're making. And then you dice them up the same size as the meat. And then you take, I love onions, so I usually use about 3 onions. And you chop them up and put them over to the side. When you start to put it together, because it's in layers, I take my salt pork first and I lay it on the bottom so it doesn't stick to the pot. It's an old secret one of the elders taught me, because mine always used to stick to the pot and it'd have to be burned on the bottom. And she goes, gotta put Bixay on the bottom, and that Bixay, generates enough fat so that it doesn't stick to the bottom. And then when you serve it, you take it out. So you put your Bixay on the bottom, you put your mixture of, we use pork steak and Bixay, pork and beef, and then you put so you do a bottom layer, then you do a layer of potatoes, then in the middle you put all your onions, and then you start again, you put another layer of meat, another layer of potatoes, and then you keep doing it till you get to the top of your pot, depending on how big it is. And then at the top, you make your dough. It's almost like this, but there's also an egg that's also put in there, and you make your doughboys. And then you put that on the top, and then so you have all these layers, and then what you do is you take a wooden spoon and you make 4 holes, and you pour water, and water then will come all the way up to, you don't want to cover them up too much, but just enough to cause steam. Keep it covered, and then cooks. Maybe I cook mine all day. When I make it, I'll make it in the afternoon. Then by midnight mass, it's ready to eat and stuff, And you never stir it or anything. You leave it just as it is. So you add your dough at the end, maybe an hour or so before you want to serve it, and that's very popular. And that's Christmas Eve. We have that and stuff. So I haven't heard of too many variations. Oh, the very important ingredient in it is sage. You make sure that there's a good flavor of sage. So I always put sage on each layer and stuff. So that's our other traditional food. Moose meat is still, there's so many of us that love moose meat. We made our mincemeat pies out of the moose meat and stuff. So there are still some people that make it traditionally, but not as often. We just buy the one you get at the grocery store to make our mince pies. We still do. We still make our homemade bread. There's one version of bread like the lagalet we're making today. There's a version of bread we use when we're using yeast. We'll do our first, the first rising it's called. So you do your yeast, your oil, your salt, and then you the warm water, and you let your yeast rest for a while. You add your flour, then you knead it, and after you've kneaded, done kneading, you put it in a nice warm bowl. What we do is, I have a wood stove, so I put my bowl inside the oven of the wood stove as the fire is going, and it heats up my bowl. And when I'm ready for my bread to rise, I take the bowl out, I put my dough in it, and I put it on top of the wood stove away from the direct heat, cover it up, and the first rise in, it'll go like, here's the bowl, and it'll go up like this. You punch it down the first time, because usually you punch it twice to make your bread. But after the first punch, you can then take a little piece like this into your hand and make a little ball. And then what we do is we have a cast iron skillet, and we'll just put a little bit of fat on it. You take that little dough and then you just go like this, and you let it fry a little bit, and you'll see it rise because of the yeast. And when it's done and crisp on the bottom, you flip it over, and trust me, if you knew your elders well, and I still do this for my giveaway, I could buy an elder a $50 certificate to a casino. Trust me, I make that bread, it's going to be worth 5 times that casino ticket, because the elders, there's not too many people that make that bread that way anymore because it does take a while. So it's the time, I think that's the gift that you give to your people. So we still do that. We also still make traditional donuts in our communities. And there's also a recipe for donuts that some people don't want to share, but matter of fact, when I shared my grandmother's, the rest of my family were upset because they said, "You're not supposed to share that. That's our family secret." But there's not that many people making homemade donuts, so we have to share our recipes. But those are the other things that we have besides our blum, our salmon, our fiddleheads, all the jams that have been put away, and the jams that we put away in the summer. And anyways, those are some of our traditional recipes. I'm going to check the lagalet. Agi, gizajwil lagalet, meskenok mitsoltiwek, tachulas weltamotipen, chigalozit, nijbalwid debia, chupsiwin. We always do a blessing over the bread, and it's to, as one elder said, that she remembers that it was to make sure that there was enough for everybody, so that it's when it's shared. And so instead of, like, a lot of people will start to use a knife, but we don't. We use our hands, and what we do is we break it apart like this. So you see the nice center, nice steam coming out of it. And Cecilia's going to set our table. Okay. First thing is, this is called gastun nohuzud.
Gastu
Nohuzud.
Nuhuzud.
That means something you wipe your mouth with. Gastun nohuzud.
Gastun Nahusud.
Very good. So for her. Yeah. Okay, Cecile, you want to set the table for us, please?
Okay.
M1 says. Hold it up. Yeah. This is M1 says.
Quinces.
We do this
Yeah.
one.
And then, I just want you to say it. Yeah. And Mitsudie.
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 You remember how to say it? Mikudanis.
Mikudanis.
Mikudanas.
Yeah. Wallet.
Gwalid.
Okay.
Gwalid.
Malaksiban.
Malaksibud.
Malaksiban.
Molasses.
Molasses.
Or Makwanap
Makwanap.
is another thing that we could use, is for maple syrup or molasses. Milin wallet those. Wallet, yeah. Gituk. Gituk. Okay, Gituk. Mes mitsoltivet tachulas weltamot. Even before we eat, we have to give gratitude. Wuliwan.
Wuliwan.
Chilmijawagan.
Chilmijawagan.
Wuliwan.
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 Chilnodakwet.
Chilnodakwet.
Wuliwan.
Wuliwan.
Chilbemkiskak.
Chilbemkiskak.
Chigigusan.
Chigigusan.
That means thank you for the food, thank you for the cook, and thank you for today, Mother Earth. Mittepso.